The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.
To see you tonight, Senator. And so your plan to combat what we expect will be the president's plan tomorrow night.
Megan, it's good to be with you. We are unfortunately witnessing a constitutional crisis. What President Obama is doing is he is defying the law. He's defying the Constitution. You know, the president quite rightly said just a few weeks ago, his policies were on the ballot all over the country. This last election was a referendum on amnesty. And the American people overwhelmingly rose up and said, no, we don't want lawless amnesty. And I'm sorry to say President Obama's reaction is defiant, and it is angry with the American people. And if the president goes forward with this, if he goes forward unilaterally defying the Congress elected by the people, defying the American voters, then it's incumbent on Republicans in Congress to use every single constitutional tool we have to defend the rule of law, to rein in a president so that the president does not become an unaccountable monarch imposing his own policies in defiance of the American people. This is a moment of testing, and I am hopeful we will see Republicans in Congress stand up and side with the people against a lawless president.
I know you believe that if Congress does not act, you say it will lose its authority. It's a bigger issue than whether you agree with the end result of what the president's about to do. It's a matter of separation of powers, how strong the executive is going to be, and whether Congress is still relevant.
Well, you know, the founding of our country, our framers were familiar with a monarchy. They were familiar with a despotic king. And we fought a revolution to be free from King George, to have the rights of the people protected by a Constitution, protected by a Congress. And if you read the Federalist paper, they talked about the dangers of a despotic executive that rules by fiat.
They weren't the only ones. President Obama talked about that repeatedly over the past 6 years, only he sees it differently now, apparently.
You are exactly right, and it's a very strange thing. You know, in elections that he liked, the president was fond of saying elections have consequences. Well, this last election, there was no ambiguity. There were two issues that dominated this last election. Number one, Obamacare, and number two, amnesty. This was a referendum on amnesty. And the American people overwhelmingly said, we don't want Obamacare. It's a disaster. It's hurting the American people, and we don't want amnesty. And I'm sorry to say, the president is behaving in an unprecedented way. There is not, in recent times, any parallel for a president repudiated by the voters standing up and essentially telling the voters, go jump in a lake, he's going to force his powers.
You know, the White House came out today through Josh Earnest and said what they think the message was. This was a message directly to you, by the way. The president has drawn a message from the midterms that the American people want progress. And they point to the fact that the Senate passed a bipartisan bill. The House has sat on it for over 500 days. The American people, they believe, want progress, even though the polls suggest they don't want the president to do it this way.
Well, look, many of the senators that voted for the bill he's talking about were voted out of office. You know, if they're spinning that the message of this last election is that Congress should suddenly agree with President Obama's policies and roll over, then they've traveled to some of these states that have legalized marijuana and they've been smoking something. Because that ain't what this election was. This election said, the American people said, the path we're on isn't working. And I got to tell you, Republicans all over this country, we campaigned and said, if you elect us, if you give us a Republican Senate, we will stop Obamacare and we will stop amnesty.
Okay, but let's get specific.
It's incumbent on us, Megan, to lead.
Let's get specific.
The only people who don't want to disclose the truth are people with something to hide.